Welcome to the GTU. I'm Thomas Mumford, Vice President of Exploration for Scottie Resources. I'm going to be talking to you today about Scottie Resources' Scottie Gold Mine project and the Blueberry Zone that we've discovered and how we've advanced that project over the years. A few forward-looking statements. We're located in the Golden Triangle. We're located in the southern portion of the Golden Triangle, as with many of the stories that you've heard here on this seminar series. If you look there in yellow, that's our land package. That's the claims that we hold tenure to in the southern end of the Golden Triangle. You can see we've got a lot of famous neighbors in the area around us. Now our land package constitutes about 60,000 hectares of land. It's in a number of large pieces of land, which is advantageous for holding ground in the Golden Triangle. You see that we are connected to many of the pieces of land via road access. And there's a number of mines in the area around us which have mills or were past producers back in the day. Now, what I'd like to talk to you today about is how we found what we found and how we got to where we are today. And it's a bit of a longer story, so I will go back in time a little bit to bring you up to speed of where we are, and then the geology of what we've discovered and how we've advanced the project as much as we have. Now, one of the advantages of where we work, particularly in the Golden Triangle, is that we've got a little bit more infrastructure than some of our competitors. One of the things about the Golden Triangle is it is a remote area to work. It is difficult to get around, it is expensive to operate, it has a short season relative to other jurisdictions in the world. Now, it is one of the most prominent jurisdictions to find mineralization in the world. It has a number of world-class deposits of varying types. But Scottie is kind of set apart from those other deposits in the Golden Triangle because of its access to infrastructure. And it's kind of a second wave of infrastructure that's advanced Scottie to where it is today. One of the big advantages is road access. We've got the Grand Duke Haul Road, which was put in for the previous Grand Duke mine just north of the Scottie deposit. In addition to that, we've got a transmission line that runs right up along our property boundary, which was put in place for the Bruce Jack mine. So you've got road access, you've got power, you've also got shipping. So out of the Port of Stewart, just south, where most of our operations are based out of, there is a shipping container facility there, so you can ship large pieces in for mine building, but there's also a concentrate shipping located there as well. So Bruce Jack mine, which is now owned by Newmont, as well as the Red Chris mine, both ship concentrates out of the town of Stewart, which gives us a big advantage on how you get your product to market at the end of the day. What lured me into the project? So I've been with Scottie for about 5 years. But before that, my career was largely spent in academia. So I did my master's, I did my Ph.D., and I graduated, and then I went and worked at a college. So I worked at BCIT in Vancouver for about 5 years, and I was the program head for the mining and mineral exploration engineering degree. So when I came in, there was a diploma, we'd advance it to a degree, and basically we were training that next round of mineral resource engineers to operate in BC particularly. But when I was in that opportunity, there was no research component to it. So the summers were largely free to do as I pleased, and I had a lot of vacation time. But what I chose to do with that was work for a variety of exploration companies across Canada. I worked in Quebec, I worked in Ontario, I worked in northern BC, I worked in the Golden Triangle, and I got to see a variety of projects and experience a lot of geology. And kind of one of the old sayings in geology is he who sees the most rocks wins. So I got to see a lot of deposits in my day. And one summer in 2018, I was working on a project in the Golden Triangle. I was doing some rope access mapping where you rappel down off of a cliff and you look at the rocks on a very steep slope. And that job had wrapped up, and I was moving on to something else, and I got a call to come in and do a relogging project on a historic deposit. And that ended up being the Scottie Gold Mine. So I went down, I started there, I was training a few geologists up to do this relogging program on the Scottie Gold Mine. And I met the CEO. It was a very small program. It was a very small company at the time. And I quite liked the geology. I loved the terrain, I loved the area, and I loved the upside. So what lured me in originally was the past producing Scottie Gold Mine itself. And you can see here in this figure, all the green is what they mined out. And they operated in the early 80s. Produced just under 100,000 ounces at a very high grade, at 16 grams per ton gold over the life of the mine. But what's interesting here is that the mine operated with a high cutoff grade, so 10 grams a ton. But if you look now at deposits, now you're looking at things that are on the order of 3 grams a ton. And the difference there between what it was economic back in the day and what's economic now is big. And that adds a lot of upside. So there was a lot of things that they were drilling through and exploring and putting the mine through that were uneconomic. They just weren't worth mining back when the mine operated, but they're worth a lot now. Another interesting fact was that the average hole length was only 75 meters long. That means that's a very short hole in exploration. That means they were basically mining a vein, they were standing on the vein, and they were poking ahead trying to figure out where that vein went to. So it's production style drilling. They were never focused on finding how big the deposit was. They were never focused on seeing if there was more comparable deposits on the property. They were operating a mine and trying to keep that mine going. And they were doing that successfully. They had about 2 years of production ahead of them when the mine shut down. But to me, I was mostly interested in the grassroots exploration potential of the system. So one, you could take this project and you could expand the mine. The drill holes just stop around the known ore body, what they mined out. They had a lot of success at the very bottom of the mine. And you can see here, we had a lot of targets on where we'd want to continue that mine and where the projected chutes, the ore chutes from the mine would go. So that was an easy follow-up. But what really interested me was the property had limited scale, property scale exploration done on it in the past. So, basically they found the vein at surface and they started mining, and that was kind of the end of the story. And they never went back in to really evaluate what else was out there. And the project, just how it came about and how it folded up when it was a past producing mine, meant that not a lot of people had ever looked at it. And that's where I saw the big upside when I came into the project. History of it, very quickly. The veins were first found in the 1930s, late 1920s, early 30s. They started drilling it. They did a little bit of underground development, and then it kind of just sat around. And it sat around until the late 1970s. And Don McLeod, a very famous miner in Canadian history, this was one of his very first mines. He's a local legend, and his family's a legend in the town of Stewart itself. He formed this mine and started mining in the early 80s. Now, the production for the mine was a fairly short endeavor relative to most mines. So it ran from 81 to 85. And the mine closed not because they ran out of gold, not because they ran out of ore. The mine closed because of economic reasons. There was a few competing factors. The biggest, by far, was interest rates. So when they started the mine, they took a $20 million facility with the Royal Bank of Canada, paying 22% interest. And when they operated that mine, that debt load was very heavy on them. Not only that, the gold price crumbled. So it went from about 700 to 350 over the life of mine. And then the operational costs of running the mine increased over that time because the Grand Duke mine shut down during that period. And that was being shared with them to operate the road to get up to site. So once that shut down, dropping gold prices, the debt was too much for them to come out from underneath, and the mine failed at that point, not because of the gold grade. The mine went into receivership, the Royal Bank took it, and it just kind of floundered around for a number of years. Now, like I said before, the mine did produce just under 100,000 ounces at a very high grade, 16.2 grams per ton, and that was the recovered grade. We've done quite a bit of sampling on the tails that exist there now, and the average grade is about 2.2 grams a ton. In the tails, that means the head grade for the mine is in the order of 18 to 20 grams a ton when the mine was operating. Now, if you have a 3 gram per ton cutoff grade, which is what other mines in the area are operating with, you get a nice mineralized halo around that existing ore body and a lot of opportunity. In the 1980s, in conjunction with the operation of the mine, there was some limited exploration that was going on around the mine. But one of the big factors there was Grand Duke mine was just a kilometer or two to the north of it, and it had a mineral reserve placed around it where they couldn't operate in terms of exploration. It was excluded for that, and it was excluded for the camp. There was a camp of about 500 people that lived there for the Grand Duke mine. There was veins that were quite high grade that outcrop at surface, and they were quite interesting. So they actually petitioned to remove that mineral reserve from the Grand Duke mine. They formed a JV with the operators of the Grand Duke mine, and then they started exploring for this Bend and Blueberry vein, which outcrop right along the roads. They did a bit of drilling, mapping, sampling, and they advanced it somewhat during that period. Not much happened until the 1990s, just in terms of soil sampling and rock sampling, just kind of a couple of tire kickers going along with the project. It didn't really get another kick at the can until Bruce McLeod, which is Don McLeod's, the original miner for the Scottie gold mine, came along and drilled it in 2004 and 2005. And at that time, gold was about $600 an ounce, and it was at parity with the US dollar, which isn't to the advantage of mining. So he did a bit of drilling. He tried to show that the main zone at the Scottie gold mine had more potential and to drill it down to the depth. And the concept at that time was to take that ore from Scottie, and then you would put it through the Westman mill, which is now Ascot's premier mill, to make money off it that way. It didn't need to be that big to make sense, but unfortunately the economics didn't really make sense, and Bruce went on to do molybdenum exploration after that, and then Sabina Gold after that. Now, after that period that Bruce was in there, the claims kind of got subdivided up and put off into different organizations and companies in the area. Decade Resources was one of them. They had some nice hits on the Blueberry Zone in 2014, but really not much else happened in that area. 2016 to 2018, Scottie Resources started under a different name at that time, and it started restructuring and reconsolidating the area. And this is when I came in. I was brought in for this re-logging program. We re-looked at the Scottie Gold Mine core. Most of the assays were only for gold and silver, so we went in and we did multi-element geochemistry, trying to find vectors to find more mineralization in the deposit. We also did shoulder sampling. So the historic core was drilled, and they would only take what they thought was going to run, so a nice juicy looking vein, which in this case is pure-type pyrite-rich sulfide lenses. But they wouldn't necessarily sample the shoulders. Now, when they were operating with a 10 gram per ton cutoff rate, that made a fair amount of sense at the time. But the shoulders easily can contain 6-7 grams a ton, so you get a nice wider intercept, which increases your tonnage and increases the number of ounces that deposit has, which just in general increases the economics of that mine. 2016 to 2018, the land acquisition phase of Scottie started up. So we acquired the Bow property just to the north and almost doubled the land package. And now the Bow property was interesting. It had a Blueberry and the Ben veins on it. And those veins are very similar in style to what you have at Scottie Gold Mine, which is a pure-type pyrite-rich sulfide vein that's very gold-rich and has comparable silver values in it. So that was a big acquisition for us. And then in April 2019, we made a major land acquisition, and that basically enveloped the Scottie Gold Mine. And that's really when exploration kicked off for Scottie Resources. Looking at an oblique image here, this is from a drone, this is what the terrain looks like in the Scottie Gold Mine area. So you've got the Scottie Gold Mine, and everything at the Scottie Gold Mine was underground. So that the 2,800-foot portal that you see there, that's the main entrance to the mill itself. So if you go in a couple hundred meters, that's where the mill for the mine is. That's where they crushed up the rocks. Above that's the 29, that's where the power plant was, and then the 3,000 is the main access to the mine itself. At the 3,600 port, that's really where the deposit is. And the deposit itself is a set of stacked veins that are basically parallel with this screen and are steeply dipping in that orientation. Now, an interesting thing is when the mine operated, this entire lake bed off to the right was filled with water. There's a glacier downstream here called the Salmon Glacier. And it was so high at the point when this mine was in operation that the whole lake bed filled with water. Now, seasonally, that lake bed would actually evacuate. The glacier would lift up off, the lake would evacuate, and then the glacier would fall back down. And that did that seasonally, but it meant that you couldn't really explore on the lake bed. It wasn't until the late 1980s and the 90s that the Great Glacier retreated enough that you could now explore full time on that lake bed in the summer. And that's provided a few opportunities for Scottie Resources. One of them is to find the east-west extension of the veins at the Scottie Gold Mine projecting underneath the lake bed, under these sediments. The tailings are now exposed at surface. As I mentioned before, they've got about 2.1, 2.2 grams a ton on average in the tails, and as high as 6 grams per ton in the tails. The biggest advantage by far upside for us now, though, is our identification of this Blueberry Zone on the far right there, and that contact projects underneath that historic lake bed. I'll talk quite a bit more about that in a bit. Now, that 2019 program, after we had acquired these new pieces of land up and around the Scottie Gold Mine, forming what we call the Scottie Gold Mine project now, really opened up a huge new opportunity for us. One of those was caused because this land package hadn't been assembled together in many, many years. And a lot of it hadn't been explored in 25, 30 years, particularly on the other side of the mountain from the Scottie Gold Mine, where there's a substantial amount of glacial material that has been removed since then due to natural ablation of the glaciers. So a lot of new rocks were exposed in the previous 30 years from us operating there. And so we went in for a major exploration program, surface-based program, mapping, prospecting, trying to figure out what was new, what were we going to be able to look at that people hadn't looked at before. With that regional focus, we were able to discover dozens of new gold-silver veins in the area, and more importantly, we redefined the regional stratigraphy of the area so that we were able to interpret what we had in a different context than those had done in the past. You can see here in this figure from a news release we made a discovery further to the west from the Scottie Gold Mine, about 2 kilometers almost. We call it their domino discovery. And really what we were following up there is you see these EM anomalies. So there was a 2-frequency electromagnetic airborne survey done in the 1980s, and it really lit up over top of the Scottie Gold Mine. And it's probably due to the presence of pyrrhotite and pyrite in such high concentrations. There was a number of anomalies elsewhere on the property that were identified, but not really followed up that well. So we went in, that was kind of our first order, was let's go identify what is causing all these geophysical anomalies. So we went into these areas where the EM anomalies existed and went as close to them as we could. Sometimes they were buried under ice, and tried to justify them by ground truthing on what they were. Domino, we made a discovery doing that. We found the massive sulfide lenses right along the edge margin of that glacier there. Some of them would have been just exposed years before we got there, and they would have been well buried in the ice before anybody had been there in the 1990s mid-1990s, when it would have been the last program. I took a sample there, 536 grams per ton. You know, that set off quite a rush for us on what was over there on that side of the mountain. This is, if you literally kept the tunnels going at Scottie, you would pop out on this side of the mountain. So it was a pretty interesting discovery for us. It was along strike of the system that we had identified at Scottie. So we went in pretty excited to that target. In addition, further to the south, you can see in the inset image up there on the top left, we also made a number of discoveries further down to the south, also again chasing up on these EM anomalies, and found gold as well as base metal values that were elevated. And so we found a lot of interesting things doing that big regional program our first year out as a team. Now late in the season, gold had a little bit of an uptick, and we decided we wanted to drill a few holes to advance the project and the company. So we drilled 2,000 meters on 3 different targets. We drilled the Blueberry Zone, which was at the time just the Blueberry Vein. We drilled the Scottie Gold Mine, and then we drilled the Ben Vein. And we hit on all 3 of those with really substantial holes. Blueberry was 7.5 over almost 35 meters, grams per ton gold. Scottie was 11 grams over almost 11 meters, and that was about a 50-meter step out down plunge on the mine, which is substantial given the grades that we're talking about. And then the Ben Vein, this was a confirmation hole. The Ben Vein and the Blueberry Vein both outcrop at surface. We had very limited data, and we weren't really able to rely on where the positioning of the data was, but they had done a small resource on the Ben Vein. And so we drilled a confirmation hole through that, and that worked out very well. Very high-grade mineralization that outcrops at surface. We went back in the next year. We were very motivated. We had a lot of reason to understand where we were going to find more mineralization and how to follow it up. We did another major rock sampling program on the area. This is the samples from the 2020 program. You know, red is the highest, obviously, but yellow is quite interesting. Yellow is 0.5 to 2 grams per ton on there. So a lot of high-grade mineralization, widespread across the property. And we did a bit of drilling as well as IP. And we did an airborne EM survey. So this time we did a time domain EM survey over the top of the entire property as well as mag, and then a couple smaller scale induced polarization on the ground geophysical grids as well. We really pushed on the domino that year. We identified further showings, and we did this IP grid, which had a really nice coincident anomaly at the very south, I guess that's western end of this showing. And we showed we had about 800 meters of strike length there of anomalous mineralization, and then there was another 2-kilometer gap back to the Scottie Gold Mine project itself. Did drilling up in the top end of it where we knew we had good control on what we had found the previous year in terms of gold mineralization, and came away with some pretty interesting results. You can also see how much the glaciers retreated since those previous photos I showed you in the other slides there. So we were able to explore quite a bit around this domino area. And when we went and drilled it, we had the grades finally. We could show that we had substantial grades over at Domino. And these were grades that were in the order of what was at Scottie. Scottie, we continued to drill that, got great grades, great widths at Scottie, but Blueberry was exceptional. The grades and the widths at Blueberry were by far greater than both of those other 2 targets. And in addition to that, the ore at Blueberry that we were discovering was on a road, which meant we didn't need a helicopter to operate anymore. We were able to use a skid rig, which dropped our drill costs dramatically. And around 2021, 2022, when we did a lot more exploration at Blueberry, this became fundamentally much more important because acquiring money to do this exploration had become more difficult. So drilling things that were easily accessible and cheaper to explore for became more important. The Scottie Gold Mine and Domino, we continued to advance them, but not in the same manner that we did at Blueberry, because we saw Blueberry as an order of magnitude greater upside on it. Now, the way the Blueberry advanced, so there is a vein that outcrops at surface. It's the same style of mineralization that you have at the Scottie Gold Mine. It's a pyrrhotite pyrite-rich vein. It's massive sulfides. It goes from about 30 centimeters to about 4 meters in width at surface, striking to the northeast, and it's dipping fairly moderately to the northwest. Now, that vein has been known about for a long time, and this is one of the main reasons that mineral reserve got removed. But people thought that was the only source of mineralization in the area. When we drilled this hole, we were trying to show that that vein went deeper than previously expected. It had been drilled, but only to about 40 or 50 meters from vertical. So when we went in to drill it, we were trying to show it went to 75, 100 meters, trying to show more upside on that vein. But the interesting thing was when we drilled it, we hit a zone of mineralization before we got to the vein itself. And it looked very cryptic. We didn't even realize it was going to run as it did. But we were sampling top to bottom, which was to our advantage. And it wasn't until we got the assays back almost 3 months later that we realized that we had a significant discovery there, or something unusual was going on there that was promising. We went back up into Stewart in the middle of the winter and dug out the core from the snow pile and went and looked at it and trying to understand it. And it was honestly still then, and even if you look at the core now, it looks pretty cryptic on why it was running as well as it did. Which is total justification why previous operators in the area didn't recognize the mineralization style that we were chasing here. I mean, this road was driven for 40 or 50 years, and to have those grades in rocks at surface is pretty remarkable. When we went back into 2020, we didn't understand what we had hit, so we said, let's step out very slowly and trying to understand and kind of come up with a plan on what we had hit. We were stepping out 25 to 50 meter pierce point separations on previous drilling to try to understand where that gold was coming from, and we're largely successful from it. We stepped out to the north, the south of the vein. That hit to the south, the 22 grams over almost 6 meters, that's only 15 meters from surface. So we knew we were onto something special here, but more importantly, we came away with a new geological model and a concept. So you can see here in this figure that there's a gold mineralizing trend that's north-south oriented, and that's largely defined based on superficial samples, both soils and rock samples that we had identified. So we knew there was something in this area, and there was a contact that runs through here between an andesite, which is on the left side, and a siltstone on the right side. We knew that contact went really close to where this mineralization and the drilling was being formed. Not exactly all the time, but really close. Now, the andesite is well known as a host rock in the area. That's what hosts the Scottie Gold Mine. This is in the Hazelton. It's an andesitic unit of the Unik River Formation. The siltstone's kind of a dead rock, and it wasn't that exciting to us. But it seemed, right at the contact, seemed to be an exciting area to explore. So we said, okay, well, if that's working, let's go to areas where that contact outcrops at surface, where we know exactly it is, and let's drill some short holes to see if the contact is the control. Maybe it's not the veins. And that's what we did in 2021. We went to the north where the road cuts the contact, or you can put your finger right on the contact, and to the south. To the north there, we hit 34 grams over almost 12 meters, 30 meters from surface. And then down to the south, 4.2 grams over almost 12 meters, same widths, almost 30 meters from surface again. Now we had about 700 meters of strike length, but more importantly, we had validated a geological model on which we could further test, something to explore, and something that had scale much greater than an individual vein that was being chased before. And we had a lot of great grade supporting the model. Now you can see just to the north of the screen, that's where the Grand Duke Mill is, the historic mill. So when we went in 2022, we said, well, how big is this thing? We went to the north as far as we could. Now we hit a contact up against what we call the Texas Creek Plutonic Suite, which is an intrusive rock in the area. And it's a fault-bounded contact, and you can see the offset from those arrows on that figure there. We drilled until we drilled across that fault and realized that the fault was what truncated mineralization. It was post-mineralization, and it itself was not mineralized. So we had found the northern margin of the Blueberry system here. Now we had upside in trying to figure out where the offset on that fault was, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. To the south, we lose the contact under that historic lake. So that lake bed is down there to the south. It's covered in recent sediments, not millions of years old, but tens of thousands of years. So we couldn't see where the contact was, but we picked up the contact on the opposite shoreline and said, well, this is interesting, let's drill a few holes here. So we drilled about 5 or 6 holes, and I think 80 to 90% of those holes, so 4 to the 5 or 5 to the 6 of those holes, hit appreciable mineralization down to the south. We now had 1.5 kilometers of strike length in the system, and things were starting to look quite interesting for us at this point. If we look at that in long section, so if you take a slice right along that contact, and you go straight down, and then you look at it from the west towards the east, that's what you're looking at here. This is the long section. On the north end of the long section, you've got the mill fault. That's that fault that truncates the mineralization to the north. All the black dots are where drill holes would pierce that projected plane that we're looking at, and we can see how the grade is distributed around these holes and the scale of what we're drilling here. We can also see gaps in the data set here. So in between those two zones, that open arrow right in the middle, that's where the lake bed is at surface. That's where we had no geological control at surface, and so we didn't start drilling there. We started drilling from areas that we had a control point, where we knew where the contact was and where we wanted to expect grade. At the end of the 2022 drill program, we had pushed the deposit down to about 400 meters depth, and we had expanded the strike length to over 1.5 kilometers. But we had a lot of upside. So when we walked into this year, this is 2023, we had targets here. We had expansion around what we had already known, filling in the gaps, and then we had extension potential to the south. We had also extension potential to the north. So we had figured out where the offset went on the north end of the fault. So we knew what type of fault it was. It was a strike slip fault. Now we don't know what the vertical movement on that fault is yet, but a really nice thing here is you can see a really strong golden soil anomaly on the north side of the fault, and it is clearly truncated by the fault. And that fault is defined through geological mapping, through geophysics, and through this soil grid. The fact that it stops right at that fault contact of where we've projected it gives us a lot of credibility that that fault is where it is, but not only that, that the soil samples are really telling us what the bedrock is underneath. Because when you work in terrain like this that's heavily glaciated, one of the big concerns is that you're looking at till on top of rock that's been moved from elsewhere, that is not representing the underlying geology, the underlying lithology. What you're really looking at here is that the gold looks like it's coming from those rocks, and the fault is basically butting up two different rock types together. If this was just a till dispersion, you would expect that mineralization to extend right across that bounded fault contact. We drilled a few holes in this area, and we hit lower grades than we were expecting, lower grade than what we had at Blueberry, but over longer distances. So one of these holes here, it hit 0.35 grams over the entire hole length of 245 meters, which is interesting. It's not economic at current levels at that point, but is getting quite interesting. And it talks to maybe a different deposit type. So maybe a bulk tonnage target, maybe a porphyry type system. So we've drilled some more holes this year in 2023, and we're really hunting for something up there because it does look like we're getting a different signal. And this could be related to the fault movement, meaning not just lateral, but also having a vertical component. So we could be in a different place in the system. Now, our 2023 program had really 4 metrics that we were trying to achieve. One was at the Blueberry zone. We were trying to do expansionary drilling around the existing Blueberry deposit, connect dots, figure out what was in between different areas that we hadn't drilled yet, and just show that the system was bigger and higher grade than we had previously shown with existing drilling. The other, down to the south, was to extend the Blueberry, number 3 here. We had a geophysical grid. We knew where the contact intersected the road to the south. We had a good idea where the contact was. We wanted to show that this system continued even further to the south until it went off our claim boundary onto Newcrest, or I guess Newmont now that it's been recently bought out. We also had a new target at the Scottie gold mine. We had done a geophysical grid over top of the Scottie gold mine and identified a new buried conductor of another, what it looked like another parallel zone to what the existing zones at the Blueberry or at the Scottie gold mine were. And so we were following up on that. And then the stockwork zone, which I just talked about with that soil anomaly. We wanted to follow that up, looking for a potential porphyry system in the area, a bulk tonnage system, something much larger but appreciably lower grade than what we had at the Blueberry target. So that's what we drilled, and we did about 20,000 meters of drilling, just over that, and completed that this September. Now at Blueberry, that was the bulk of the meter. So about 17,000 went into the Blueberry target, and the other targets were deemed to be ancillary, and we drilled a few holes into each of those. Now we have started results being released from that. You can see here where we were targeting and some of the grades that we've already released from the exploration season this far, and we have over half of our program still to be released. But you're seeing that we're getting comparable grades to what we had before, and we've got a lot of upside on these holes that are filling in these major gaps in the model that we've been chasing down. I want to talk briefly about geophysics. I've kind of thrown out a few different surveys that we've done along the way. Operating this project for the last 4 or 5 years, we've had the opportunity to test a number of things and figure out what's working and what's not working. We have a little bit of a unique deposit model, and we've got a wide variation in host rocks that we're dealing with. And so trying to figure out what geophysical technique works the best has been a bit of a trial and error program. We've tried property scale exploration using airborne EM, airborne mag. We've done LiDAR. LiDAR does a really good job at identifying structures, but it also does a really good job of giving you a really well-constrained topographical boundary, so basically the surface of the Earth, so that when you're doing drilling on very steep mountainous terrain, you can have a really good control on where you sit on that terrain, and that helps your modeling eventually. We've done IP, so induced polarization, basically charging the ground and figuring out what conducts electricity and what doesn't. There's 2 varieties of that. There's a conventional IP, which is just basically lines, and then there's 3D, where you charge an entire grid up and get a little bit more resolution that way. We've also done horizontal loop EM. So horizontal loop EM really speaks to the sulfide characteristics of the deposit that we have. So the pyrite and the pyrite that we have, horizontal loop EM seems to work really well at that. We've done borehole EM as well. So you put this probe down the hole that you've drilled, and it's supposed to be able to identify electromagnetic signatures in the area around you. So if you had an ore body that was maybe just outside of your drill hole, with borehole EM, you should be able to see around there and project it. And if you combine HLEM, TEM, you can really start to get a better picture on what's around the existing ore body. So we did that at the Scottie gold mine, where we knew we had good responding targets, and we could project where we may have other ones in the area. We tried drone mag. We've tried a lot of different geophysics, and some of them work, and some of them don't really give you a good signal. Like, for instance, mag doesn't seem to work that well for us for identifying mineralization. Now, pyrite's a magnetic mineral, but the natural andesite that we have at host has natural magnetite in it, and that seems to wash out the magnetic signature associated with the mineralization. So mag doesn't work. IP does a really good job at identifying the contact between the siltstone and the andesite, but it doesn't really pick up any sulfide lenses that complement the mineralization there, which is where HLEM comes in. So it's a combination of things that really gives you your best drill targets. And we've worked a long time, and we've worked with geophysical consultants to kind of understand our rocks the best. We've also done petrophysical characterization and testing of our rocks to really understand the properties of what the mineralization we have is and how it's going to respond to different geophysical techniques. One of the wins for us in terms of geophysics, this is one of the only ones in my career, so just bear with me here. Geophysics often gives you a lot of targets, and you drill them, and a lot of times you get dusters. But this time was quite an accessible win for us. So we had been drilling. We were chasing things further to the south. This is in 2022. We'd done this large HLEM grid over the old lake bed. So not a lot of geological control, can't really see much. It's just sediments on surface. We knew where the contact should project, and we wanted to test a few things a little bit further. We had been sending daily data to our geophysics consultant, and he was modeling it up. And he had a great anomaly. He modeled a plate, a Maxwell plate for us, and he said, you should drill this target. And we said, okay, well, we don't really have anything else to go on. We want to drill in this area. When we drilled his target, and right to his XYZ coordinate where it was, ended up running 7 grams over almost 6 meters, or just over 6 meters, in a zone that was 22 meters wide of notable gold mineralization. And if you look at the drill core there, at the very top, those first 3 or 4 rows are almost entirely massive sulfides, mostly pyrite in that case. And that really spoke to this geophysical technique. So when we went back into 2023, we did a much larger HLEM grid, covering a lot larger terrain with the hopes of having another anomaly like this come out. Now I'll get into a little bit more of the geology of where we are. So Scottie Gold the gold mine area, the Scottie Gold Mine project, sits in the lower Hazelton largely. You've got an upper siltstone area that we have bounding with the lower Unic River, and that's where our Blueberry contact zone is. The lower Unic River, that's where the Scottie Gold Mine project is. And then if you go further south in the stratigraphic column, you get into the Stahini. And that's crossing that is Jeff Kaiba's red line, which you've heard that in multiple of these talks in this series. That contact actually exists on our property, and that was one of the defining features when we did a regional scale reinterpretation of the geology. Just because the government geologists that had been in there before weren't mapping at the same level of detail that we were. And the concept wasn't really there either when it was mapped. The Stahini hosts our Domino target. So as we crest over the hill from Scottie towards Domino, we do crest that red line boundary. You can see that here in this geological map of the Scottie Gold Mine property. So really 3 major rock types constitute the mineralization at Blueberry and Scottie, and then we've got the Stahini rocks over at Domino. So you're dealing with Hazelton volcanics and the sediments there. Then you've got Stahini, and then you've got an intrusive suite. So this is the Texas Creek Plutonic Suite. It's a well-known suite of Jurassic Age intrusions in the area. It's associated with a lot of the mineralizing events temporally and spatially. Whether it's the source of mineralization is a point of great debate, but temporally and spatially, it does seem to be associated with a lot of the mineralizing events that are in the Golden Triangle. And then these sulfide-rich gold-silver veins that we see, these are all spatially associated around these Jurassic Age intrusions that we've seen as well. It's within this realm of a window. If we look at the Blueberry zone, this is how some of those rocks look like. So we've got this Texas Creek diorite, you've got the siltstone, and when I use siltstone, I use it as a very umbrella term. So we've got siltstone, we've got mudstone, we've got argillite. And here we've got an example of a Lamprofere dike. We've got 7 or 8 generations of mafic dikes in the area. This is just a nice textbook example of a Lamprofere. And then we've got a lower andesite phase that we have, which is the main host rock for most of the mineralization. So that's where C and D veins are. That's where most of the Blueberry zone mineralization and where the Scottie Gold Mine is hosted. If we look at the veins that constitute part of the Blueberry deposit, because there's really 2 components to the Blueberry contact zone. You've got the contact itself between the siltstone and the andesite, and then you've got veins that are northeast trending that cut across it. And it's the combination of those 2 features together that give us the widest and the highest grades in the system. These veins outcrop at surface. Sometimes they're resistive, sometimes they're not resistive to weathering, and sometimes they'll outcrop like this. They're very gossinous. They are semi to massive sulfides in most cases. Fairly tight alteration window around them, and you'll get quartz carbonate shear bands within these veins. So there has been reactivation along these vein sets. And the more we drill, the more we find. So some of these vein zones were known about in the past, but the more that we've drilled, the more we've discovered. Some of them that don't occur at surface, but do underground at drilling. Now we've got a bit of a working deposit model. The broad envelope here is that we're looking at an intrusion-related system. The closest analog in the Golden Triangle to what we have at the Scottie Gold Mine system is likely the Snip mine. Dave Reese, who did his master's at Snip, has also done a technical report down at Scottie. He thinks he's a lot of similarities between Snip and Scottie. We see a lot of chemical variations between the 2 that are supportive of an intrusion-related system, and structurally it seems to support it. One of our challenges or our understanding hurdles, and I think we've had a bit of a breakthrough this year, is it the veins or is it the contact? Which is coming first? We're getting mineralization in both, but where is the origin of the mineralization? The current model is that the veins were in place beforehand, that there were sulfide-rich veins, not necessarily gold mineralized sulfide-rich veins, but they were in place due to an attentional environment at the time. Then there was a fluid influx that was a gold mineralizing fluid up along the contact, likely bounded by the siltstone, flowing through dominantly through the andesite and taking paths where it had pre-existing weaknesses through the siltstone. But then that reacted with the existing sulfide. So there was a chemical trap at the location of the intersection between the sulfide-rich lenses that cut across it and that contact where the main fluid flow was occurring. If we look at these veins themselves, they are about 4 meters thick at the widest. They go from 10, 20 centimeters up to 4 meters. They are east-northeast striking. They are moderately dipping on large part up to about 80 degrees, but most of them are about 55 degrees. There's these dominant veins, but then there's these vein sets around them. We call them vein zones or sub-veins in a parallel sequence, and they're all largely stacked in big sequences along the Blueberry contact. If you're looking at mineralogy, you're looking at a quartz carbonate gang, you've got pyrrhotite, pyrite, and then you'll get other sulfides as well. And those generally speak to higher grades. So if we get chalcopyrite, molybdenite, galena, anything like that complementing pyrrhotite and pyrite, that's a great sign for us that the grade is going to increase. We also get a very tight alteration window around it. So silica, sericite, chlorite. Now, the chlorite is a great sign for us. There's a really black, cloddy chlorite that seems to really coincide with high-grade gold mineralization. It occurs at the Scottie gold mine as well. It's an iron-rich end member of the chlorite species, but that's a great sign for us. And when you're drilling through the contact, there's a 2 or 3 meter window at the contact where you can't tell which rock type you're in. You know that's over there is siltstone, you know that's andesite, but the primary textures of the rock right around the contact are obliterated. And the nature of the contact is a little bit questionable. We're not sure if it's conformable, or if there's been a time gap in there. It's not a shear zone. There is a little bit of shearing and movement along it, but it's not a typical shear zone along it. It does seem to be an area where it was a conduit for fluid flow and a little bit of deformation. But that largely is it. It's not a major shear structure like you would expect in like the Abitibi. This is an area where these sediments on top of the volcanics look somewhat conformable in locations, as best we've noticed so far. Looking in core, you get a spectrum. You get fully massive sulfide, blocky pyrrhotite up to 90% pyrrhotite, all the way to the other member of 90% pyrite. It's kind of an end member. The better stuff to run tends to be lower sulfide contents, 10 to 15%, with the chlorite, the carbonate, and you get a lot more shearing. The grain sizes has been reduced. There's a little bit of comminution along the grains. That tends to be where our higher grades are. Now, these photos don't really support that story, but these are examples of what this core looks like and where we're getting the grade in the system. Now we also have the contact zone. So where you're along that contact, but you're not interacting with these northeast trending veins, you still get good mineralization occurring. Now there, it's a little bit more emphasis on the chlorite and the carbonate and the silica. And this is where that first initial discovery hole at at Blueberry came from, the 7.5 grams over almost 35 meters. That was intensely chlorite rich, but low on sulfides. At surface, the zone is about 40 meters wide. You will still get pyrrhotite. Pyrrhotite is a great analog for mineralization at Scottie and at Blueberry. Not all the places you have pyrrhotite, you have gold, but almost all the times you have gold, you have pyrrhotite associated with it. And that can form in stringers or in blebs. And the presence of other sulfides only enhances increases the likelihood that is going to run appreciable gold. Looking in thin section, the distribution of gold relative to the other minerals in there. We know the metallurgy of Scottie. It was a past producing mine. We also now know the metallurgy of Blueberry. We've done metallurgical studies. We know that it can be extracted using cyanide leach, a very high percentage, up to 97%, as well as gravity flotation. So we're not dealing with a ore type where we're having problems pulling the gold out of it. But knowing where the gold is situated is interesting because it also gives you information in terms of vectoring on where you're going to look for more gold. What is it associated with? What are some other chemical vectors that you can use, pathfinders, to find more of that gold in the system? In terms of dating, we've dated mineralization. So we've done rhenium osmium on the moly associated with gold. We've got an age of 192.5. The Summit Lake stock, there's a uranium lead age from a zircon on that, 192.8, and then the detrital age that we've calculated for the sediments is 190.6. And if you put all these errors together, everything is kind of coeval, which really means that you had the volcanics placed, you had the sediments put down, you had the intrusion, and you had mineralization all within a very short period of time to justify what we see here with the dates between these different mineralizing events, which is quite interesting, and it speaks to the tectonics and the rapid evolution and the coinciding of mineralization with the Texas Creek plutonic suites emplacement. I guess just kind of stepping back and preparing for this, I kind of thought about what what made Blueberry a success, how did we get here, and just had a few key points that I wanted to reiterate is, property scale evaluation is where to start. You want to go as wide as you can to figure out what are your best targets. And at that point, then you have to start doing a little bit of triage. The Golden Triangle has some remarkable grades, and it has smoke all over the place. It's not quite like the Abitibi. If you had a 5-gram sample at the Abitibi, you're probably going to put a drill hole into it. And I have so many 5-gram per ton samples on surface that will never see a drill hole, just because you need to see more in the Golden Triangle to justify a drill hole. You need a plan on how this thing is going to become bigger and to see some evidence of something more than just an individual grab sample. Now, I'm not saying to neglect less promising targets, but you do need to focus on your highest likelihood scenarios, push on those, and advance the other ones synchronous with that. An interesting thing for us was that Blueberry was a slow burn discovery. We made the discovery hole, and anywhere else that would be considered a discovery hole, but we didn't really realize the significance. It took us 2 years to really appreciate the significance of what that hole was trying to tell us at the start. And that was because, in many ways, it was in a brownfields area. We knew there was mineralization already. We weren't expecting a new style or a new target or a new model to go after. We were chasing down what they had mined before. So it took us a while to really appreciate what we had hit and that it was different, and that that meant there was a new upside to it as well. Sampling top to bottom, really important on almost any project. You get full data sets for the entire hole. You don't miss anything. And in addition to sampling top to bottom, I would say making sure that you're getting multi-element geochemistry with it. Don't just sample for gold, silver, and the base metals. You want to know all the information you can within reason, and it is such a small additive cost to the cost of drilling versus the risk reward of finding something new or being able to point it in the right direction and saving money on 10 drill holes the next season because you found something with the additional data that you had. If possible, scale up geophysics through evaluation. So Golden Triangle has a short season in which you operate. You can only try so much, and you can only do so much in a season, and then you've got to take a big break and wait until the next season to come around. So it's not always ideal, but some of these surveys cost quite a bit of money, and you don't want to go in and do a major survey that's not going to give you any value. So if you have at a point or an opportunity to evaluate a technique before fully employing it out, I recommend it, so that you know that you're going to get what you want, and at least it's going to recognize the mineralization you already have at site. And then the last one is one that I've always battled with here is remapping something you've already mapped. I had a lot of geologists pushing me they wanted to remap things after we drilled it a couple times. And I was always a bit hesitant, but I've seen incredible value out of it. So after they've drilled, we see more in the core, and then they can interpret it more at surface again. And it's been a feedback loop. And so we've always had continuous mapping of the people that are drilling are often out in the field, in and around the Blueberry zone, the Scottie gold mine, trying to see if they can pull more out of the rocks at surface. I mean, my previous kind of impression was you go in, you do a really good map, and then you can use that map for years to come. But I've changed my view on that, in that you were getting so much more information of looking in drill core that you can add that back into your map, and you can improve your map and get new ideas out of it. And that interpretation is only going to aid your next round of exploration, your next round of drilling. I would like to take this moment to offer my thanks to so many of the partners that we've had operating up in the Golden Triangle, other partner companies, operators that we've worked with. This discovery that we've made wasn't just me, it wasn't just our team. We were standing on the shoulders of previous operators, previous workers, and a lot of other people that have contributed to this. And I would like to thank you for watching the seminar, participating in the GTU, and if you like what you've seen, I encourage you to hit the like button and subscribe. There's a lot of other great videos in this series. Thank you very much.